when I hear that click in my head, I don't hear the sound of that phone ringing anymore. And I can stop thinking.
Paul Newman had it all looks talent and a marriage that Hollywood revered for 50 years. He was the kind of man everyone looked at and thought, this is a perfect life. But that was only a perfectly polished surface. Newman could stand at the top of the film industry, earn millions of dollars, and donate most of it to help others. He could become a symbol of generosity and kindness. But there was one thing even Paul Newman could not do. He could not save his own child. That is where the story begins to turn. A father admired by the entire world, yet forced to live part of his life in guilt. An icon of loyalty, yet never able to escape the shadow of infidelity. Do not look away. This is the story of a man who had everything and then watched it all fall apart. Paul Newman, Hollywood's dream lover. Paul Leonard Newman was born on January 26, 1925, in Cleveland, Ohio. His father ran a very successful sporting goods store, so Paul was expected to one day take over the family business. But Paul chose a completely different path. The relationship between father and son was distant. His father, a practical man with a drinking problem, was neither warm nor confident in his son's future. Newman felt like a failure in his father's eyes. Tragically, his mother was no different. Newman's mother, Teresa, was a perfectionist and highly emotional woman from the old Austro-Hungarian world belongings, carefully covered emotions, always on the edge of eruption. At times, she spoiled Newman like a prince. At other times, she exploded in anger. Paranoid, moody, and obsessed with appearances, she gave Newman a childhood that looked glamorous on the outside, only to hide the chaos underneath. Fortunately, the young Newman found his footing on his own. After getting his first taste of acting in school plays, Paul completed his service in the Navy, then enrolled to study literature and drama at Kenyon College, graduating in 1949. That same year, he met and married actress Jackie Witt. In 1950, after his father passed away, Paul returned to run the store, but it did not last long. In 1951, Paul Newman enrolled in the Yale School of Drama, and just 2 years later he moved to New York, studying at the studio while taking on small television roles. After the huge success of the play Picnic in 1953, Paul began receiving a flood of offers from the film industry. It was also from this play that Paul met and fell in love with Joanne Woodwell, who would later become his second wife. His second marriage was praised by the press as one of the rare, admirable love stories in Hollywood history, lasting 50 years. But what if I told you that love story should never have begun? Paul Newman had everything: looks, talent, and a seemingly perfect romantic life. But despite becoming one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, Newman lived a scandal-filled double life. The first marriage, the deepest wound, looking back to the past when he was chasing the stage lights. At Yale, he met his first wife, Jackie Witt. They married in 1949, but faced difficulties from the very beginning. She was a promising actress still in college when they married, while Newman was still trying to figure out his path in life. They settled into a modest life on Staten Island, New York, raising a growing family, while Newman pursued acting classes and small stage opportunities. They had 3 children, son Scott in 1950, daughter Susan in 1953, and daughter Stephanie Kendall in 1954. At that time, Newman was not yet a famous name, and Jackie largely set aside her personal ambitions to focus on raising their children. Everything changed in 1953 when Newman met Joanne Woodward while performing together in the Broadway play Picnic. The play marked Newman's Broadway debut, and his breakthrough initially rejected for the lead role of Hal, he accepted a smaller role and eventually rose to the lead. He also began a romantic relationship with Woodward, something he later described in a memoir published after his death as the cruelty that pulled me away from my family. Even though he already had a wife and 3 children, both Woodward and Newman fell deeply for each other, throwing themselves into a turbulent affair. Newman could not ask his wife for a divorce. His relationship with Joanne Woodward caused him pain, And unbelievably, it continued in secret for 5 years, during which Jackie gave birth to a daughter. And from that moment on, Paul Newman placed his wife in a position no woman ever wants to endure. She was not someone deceived until the very end. She saw everything happening. Only 1 week after Paul officially divorced his first wife in January 1958, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward got married. Later, he often described his first marriage as, "I was an unsuccessful adulterer." Unfortunately, Newman never clarified what a successful adulterer would even be. Revealing Hollywood's golden marriage, the hidden truth. After the wedding, the couple honeymooned in London. Returning to the United States, they moved to a farmhouse in Westport, Connecticut, far from the noise of Hollywood. Woodward was also ambitious and achieved success early on. Just like Newman in 1958, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Three Faces of Eve. But after having children, she often stayed home while her husband traveled for work. Woodward said, "Being Paul's wife was my career." They had a passionate, lifelong love, and an important part of it, which they openly discussed in interviews, was their married life. The seemingly perfect marriage of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward came under closer scrutiny after a shocking rumor began circulating in the tabloids. According to the rumor, Newman had an affair with another woman while working on the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969. Her name was Nancy Bacon. Nancy was a journalist who was said to have had a romantic relationship with Paul Newman for a year and a half. When this scandalous secret came out, sources said Newman and Woodward used an advertisement in the LA Times to try to shut down the rumors. Unfortunately for them, Bacon had no intention of staying silent and even called her relationship with Newman the worst-kept secret in Hollywood. And honestly, hearing this, it is hard to feel too surprised. What could people really expect from a man who entered this marriage through an affair? When a relationship is built on someone else's pain, that shadow rarely ever disappears. From my perspective, Joanne Woodward was ultimately not much different from Jackie Witt. The only difference is that Jackie left earlier, while Joanne stayed long enough to live with the insecurity that this marriage had planted from the very beginning. Jackie may have been the one left behind, but sometimes from another angle. She may have been the luckier one. Because she walked away from a man who was very good at making others see his pain, his torment, and his image as a victim of his own life, while the people beside him were the ones who carried the longest-lasting consequences. Even more ironic is that after all the cracks, the rumors, and the quiet shadows, Paul Newman could still joke lightly about his loyalty. When asked how he managed to stay with his wife for 50 years, Newman famously replied, "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" The line made many people laugh because it sounded iconic, masculine, very Hollywood. But looking back at the full story, it no longer feels like just a charming joke. Yet it was his role as a father that caused Paul the deepest pain. Newman also opened up about his responsibility as a father. He admitted he was completely unprepared for it. He had children because it was simply what people did after getting married. "I would not want to be one of my own children," he told a former college drama teacher. He worried that he had never truly connected with his children. For a man who could embody complex characters so convincingly, being a father was a role he never felt capable of playing. Tragically, Newman would face the worst nightmare any father could endure when it came to his son Scott. The agony of being a father. Newman and his first wife Witta welcomed their first child, a son, Alan Scott Newman, on September 23, 1950. Scott was Newman's eldest child and looked a great deal like his father. But even as the son of a film icon, Scott did not have an easy life. First of all, he did not want to succeed because of his father's fame. He never wanted special treatment, once saying, "I never accepted any acting help from my father. I wanted my work to stand on its own merit." In the late 1960s, Scott followed his father into the entertainment industry, first as a stuntman and later as a leading actor. He appeared in films such as The Great Waldo Pepper in 1975 and the drama film Fraternity Row in 1977. Even so, the constant comparisons between father and son surely wore Scott down over time. Scott felt Hollywood wanted him to be like his father, an expectation he could never meet. He once told a family friend, "I'm Paul Newman Jr., you know what I mean, but I don't have his blue eyes. I don't have his talent. I don't have his luck. I've got nothing. That's me." But the real trouble began when Scott fell into drinking. Like his father, Scott struggled to find his place in life and turned to the bottle. He got into some legal trouble, but things grew darker after a fateful motorcycle accident in 1978. To deal with the pain, he began relying on painkillers. In November of that year, he took a shocking mix of substances, and the outcome was tragic. Scott Newman, 28, accidentally overdosed on November 19, 1978, and died the following day. The pain Paul Newman felt after that loss was impossible to measure. He was quoted as saying, "There is nothing anyone can say that will heal my guilt over Scott. It will stay with me for the rest of my life." But it did not stop there. As he struggled with the loss of his son, Newman faced many emotions, both grief and guilt. He tearfully admitted, "So many times I have gotten down on my knees and begged Scott to forgive me." He wondered what he could have done to change his son's fate. But even in those darkest moments, Paul Newman kept looking ahead. After his son's death, he was determined to make a difference. He founded the Scott Newman Center in 1980 with the goal of helping educate young people about the dangers of alcohol and addictive substances. The organization went even further later, creating the Rowdy Ridge Gang Camp for families affected by the consequences of these problems. Yet, through all the ups and downs of his personal life, Paul Newman's career never showed any sign of slowing down. The haunting shadow inside the Newman family. Some deaths bring a life to a close, but there are also deaths that quietly split an entire family into two halves, the half before and the half after. For the Newman family, Scott's death in 1978 did not just leave behind an empty space. It changed the atmosphere of the whole family in a way that is hard to name. The house was still there. The work went on. Paul Newman's name still shined, but from that moment on, everything entered a colder, quieter, heavier phase. Paul Newman did not collapse in public. He did not turn grief into a loud spectacle of tragedy. He kept working, kept acting, kept appearing with the same calm presence. But behind that composure was a kind of guilt with no resolution. He hurt because he believed he had helped create the distance between father and son, then realized it only when everything was already too late. That is why, after Scott's death, Newman began looking back at alcohol, looking back at fame, and looking back at the way he had been a father. Scott did not just grow up as the son of a famous father. He grew up under the shadow of a legend that could become pressure insecurity and an invisible standard always present inside the family. For Newman, Scott's tragedy was no longer just the story of a son who lost his footing. It became an indictment inside his own heart. He could not go back to the years that had passed and do them over. He could not repair a conversation that never happened. He also could never know for sure whether things would have turned out differently if he had been closer to his son. But guilt does not need proof. It only needs an empty space, and then it fills that space on its own with questions that never have answers. Instead of letting that loss remain only a part of his life, Paul Newman turned it into action. In 1980, he created the Scott Newman Center to warn young people about the dangers of alcohol and addictive substances. From a distance, it looked like one more charitable effort by a major star. He could not save his own son, so he tried to save other children. He could not go back to Scott's last night, so he looked for a way to keep other families from stepping into a night like that. It did not make the pain disappear. It only gave him something to do with that pain. But the tragedy did not bring the Newman family closer in the way books like to imagine. It did not create a reunion scene where everyone embraced and finally said everything they had kept hidden. After Scott, this family became quieter, more private, and better at hiding things. Famous people are already used to living behind an image. Famous families become even more skilled at it. They know how to appear proper, say, just enough keep private life from spilling out and stop the legend from collapsing in front of the public. But the price of that control is that the most important things never get said while there is still time. That is why, after 1978, the Newman family tragedy no longer rested in a single death. It rested in the long stretch of life that followed when everything kept going, but nothing was the same. Paul Newman was still the Hollywood gentleman, still the symbol of talent, strength, and kindness. But behind that image was a father living with a sentence no praise could erase. Scott was the one who died, but the one condemned to live with that sentence for the rest of his life was Paul Newman. The struggle to escape the Newman shadow while living under the Newman shadow. Living under the Newman shadow was never easy, especially when that shadow belonged to one of Hollywood's greatest icons. For Paul Newman's children, the challenge was not simply choosing a career. The challenge was that if they entered the arts, they were almost certain to be compared to their father. And if they chose a different path, the public saw that as a sign that they were not strong enough to carry on the legacy. In that situation, the careers of Newman's children were never viewed through a normal lens from the very beginning. They were not allowed to start from zero. They had to begin with the Newman name. Susan Newman is a very clear example. She was not someone lacking ability. Susan pursued acting, producing, and social work, appeared in a number of television and film projects, and earned professional recognition of her own. But the problem was that the media rarely viewed her as an independent person. Whatever she did, Susan almost always appeared with a label attached to her father's name. That made every achievement of hers easy to dismiss as an extension of the family legacy rather than something she had built herself. For someone serious about her craft, that is a kind of pressure that is very hard to put into words. Not because nobody knows what you do, but because everybody thinks they already know, simply because you carry a famous last name. Stephanie Kendall Newman almost went in the opposite direction. She did not step deeply into public life the way many people might expect from the daughter of a superstar. That privacy was itself a career choice in some sense, because for some people born into families that are too famous, keeping distance from the spotlight is not failure. It is the only way to protect themselves from a machine that always wants to turn them into the next version of their parents. Stephanie did not build a large public image, and that alone shows that not everyone with the Newman name wanted to use it as a ticket into the center of Hollywood. The three daughters of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward also reveal a very different picture from what the public once expected. Nell Newman acted when she was young, but as she got older, she moved on to a different path, one connected to organic food, the environment, and sustainable development. It was not a loud choice, but it was a very distinct one. Instead of trying to become another star in the family, Nell shifted toward building credibility in business and social causes, where she could create value without having to race against her father's film legend. Melissa Newman also spent some time connected to the arts and appeared in a few projects, but she did not push herself into a star trajectory in the traditional Hollywood sense. Later, Melissa leaned more toward painting music, teaching, and writing. This is a very notable detail because it shows that her artistic path did not disappear, it simply changed form. Melissa did not compete in the same arena that made Paul Newman famous. She chose a smaller, quieter, but freer space. Sometimes escaping the shadow of a legend does not happen by stepping into a brighter spotlight, but by choosing a different kind of light. Clea Newman Soderlund moved even farther away from the orbit of film. Instead of building a name through movies, she devoted most of her time to charity conservation and community projects. It was a less glamorous path, but a more lasting one. It also reveals a fairly clear truth: none of Paul Newman's children truly turned themselves into a second Paul Newman. not because they lacked opportunity, but because that was almost an impossible race to win. When your father has already become the standard, every attempt to repeat that journey can turn into more of a trap than a dream. That is the most important point in the careers of Newman's children. They did not lack talent. They did not lack opportunity either. But they had to build careers in an environment that always looked at them through the lens of a family legend. If they succeeded, people said it was because of the Newman name. If they failed to explode, people immediately saw it as falling short. In that world, building an independent career becomes far harder than outsiders imagine. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle is not the lack of a door to walk through. It is that too many people are already standing there just to see whether you are like your father or not. Farewell to the legend, Paul Newman. Paul Newman passed away on September 26, 2008, closing the life of one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. He died at his home in Westport, Connecticut at the age of 83 after a long battle with cancer. News reports at the time all stated that he was surrounded by family and close friends in his final hours. The way he left this world was also much like the way he lived in the final years of his life. Private understated, never turning illness into a public performance. Newman's final months were far quieter than the scale of his fame. Earlier in 2008, he had withdrawn from plans to direct Of Mice and Men at the Westport Country Playhouse because his health was declining. When rumors of his cancer began to spread, his side made almost no effort to launch a campaign of explanation or appeal for sympathy. There were no long interviews, no public appearances meant to draw attention. There was only the brief information that he was receiving treatment, followed later by confirmation that he had died of cancer. According to many sources, Newman had once been a very heavy smoker for many years before quitting, and that detail adds another layer of bitter irony to the final chapter of his life. Paul Newman's farewell was carried out in exactly that same spirit. Reuters reported that memorial services for him were held privately. Later, biographical sources agree that he was laid to rest in a quiet family ceremony and then cremated. There was no lavish Hollywood funeral, no grand stage for the public to come pour out their grief. And that suited the image Newman carried into the final stretch of his life. Even as a superstar, he always kept a certain distance from the noise of fame. So that private farewell did not make him seem smaller. On the contrary, it allowed his ending to keep its dignity. Newman's passing, then, was not simply the death of an aging movie star. It felt like the end of a kind of man becoming rarer and rarer in Hollywood, a true film star, a husband devoted across many decades, a philanthropic icon, and a man who carried many personal contradictions. Paul Newman left in silence. But for American cinema, it was a very loud silence. After he died, people remembered not only those famous blue eyes, but also the way he held on to his composure until the very end. Legacy and career. After all the heartbreak, regret, and private darkness, what keeps Paul Newman alive in the public memory is not just a handsome face or a life full of upheaval. What made him a legend was the way he left behind a legacy larger than himself. In film, Newman was not just a star. He was the kind of actor who could move from classic charm to complex emotional depth while still keeping a rare natural ease. From Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Hustler Hud Cool Hand, Luke Butch Cassidy, and The Sundance Kid, to The Sting, The Verdict, and Road to Perdition. Paul Newman left behind a body of work strong enough to live across generations. These were the performances that helped define the image of the American man on screen for nearly half a century. But Paul Newman's legacy did not stop with film. As time went on, he proved more and more that the biggest name is not the one that earns the most money, but the one that knows how to use influence to create something meaningful. Newman's Own began as a small idea, then became a rare symbol of generosity when all profits were dedicated to charity. From that, hundreds of millions of dollars were returned to the community. Summer camps for seriously ill children, educational support funds, and programs helping vulnerable people made Paul Newman the kind of legend Hollywood does not have many of. What matters even more is that this legacy did not die with him. It continued through his children in different ways. Nell Newman carried the family spirit into the world of environmental work, organic food, and sustainable development. Melissa Newman preserved the artistic memory of the family through painting, music, writing, and years of steady creative work. Clea Newman Soderlund strongly carried forward the community side of his legacy through deep involvement in charitable work, medical camps, and nature conservation. They did not try to become another Paul Newman. They chose instead to turn the Newman name into something broader than film. It became responsibility continuity and the way a famous family learned to leave behind value rather than just glamour. Even looking back on this entire story, perhaps the fairest thing to say about Paul Newman is that he was not a perfect icon. He made mistakes, he had hidden corners, and there were parts of his private life that could never be fully erased. But that is also what makes his legacy more memorable. He is not remembered as a cold, flawless statue. He is remembered as a man who was both flawed and extraordinary, carrying deep regret while also creating enough good in the world for it to live on after him. That is why even today, Paul Newman does not belong only to Hollywood's past. He still belongs to conversations now where people still watch his films and still wonder how a man so full of contradictions could be loved so deeply. And what about you? When you look back at Paul Newman's life and legacy, what do you remember most? A brilliant movie star, a father full of regret, or a man who left too many good things behind for the world to forget? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoy Hollywood behind the scenes, stories like this, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next video.
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.